states, right? Because they'd already figured out, yeah, this is terrible. Everyone else took decades, centuries to catch up with them. With racism, with homophobia, they were already there, right? So I love this idea of just, hey, let's use our brains and use our critical thinking skills here, and apply it to this religion. Now, I don't like the religion, but like apply it to the religion, and then use it from there to do good works. Like, so I think that's really like I think Quakers are like the best of religion because of this, because they were able to constantly update themselves. A Christian researcher used medieval and Renaissance painting to claim that Jesus had a transgender body, argued that the wound inflicted on him during crucifixion was vaginal like. This has predictably created intense backlash. Is there value in this type of academic inquiry? Should it ever matter what such subjects offend others, or if such subjects offend others? Is this moment indicative of a leftist movement that has gone too far in its attempts to normalize trans individuals? Is this at all helpful to the trans liberation movement? If not, should that matter? And if there were indeed a newly discovered biblical basis to this claim, would you advise it to be shared with the world? Okay, so yeah, we if, I'm sure many people didn't really catch what I was trying to tell them because it's so strange. There was a lecture that was given in some sort of university setting or whatever, I don't know. But a lecture given, and it was about like these different paintings and like looking at these paintings and saying, okay, well, what I'm seeing here, right? There's a wound, you know, when Jesus was stabbed, right, in his side. I'm seeing here that wound kind of looks like a vagina, and then from there, drawing connections, meaning that Jesus has a male female body, right? This just recently happened, right? And people were super upset. They're calling heresy and the whatnot, and like the college, like offended this individual who made these claims, and yeah, so I guess that you're caught up. Uh, so like yeah, like what do you guys think about this like overall? I imagine everyone's gonna say the same thing, but I'd be surprised if someone didn't. But then beyond that, like, do you find value in this sort of like academic endeavor? Right, start for friend Lactoid.
Yeah. So for decades, people have made absolutely crazy claims about Jesus, right? First he was black, now they're transgender. But freedom of religion and expression exists and are obviously critically important. People are free to believe what they want. That said, from both a historical standpoint and clearly from a biblical religious standpoint, Jesus was not transgender. This is dangerous misinformation, worse than COVID misinformation. The latter is merely your body and the former your soul. The providence of God should not be disrespected with bizarre claims not rooted in the text or the ruling of the one true church, the Orthodox Church. Putin would never accept this, yet we do. I don't think this is helpful to the trans liberation movement. It's comical and makes any rational person take them less seriously.
Okay, great.
Did you say Putin would never accept this?
Yes, I did.
Scott, I'll
That's an
check your
argument
DMs.
Okay.
It's Scott.
So what I have behind me, and I'll go ahead and switch my camera over so that you can see it more clearly, is something that was leaked towards me from a whistleblower in Catholic schools in Minnesota by Outreach Minnesota, which is a LGBT organization that wanted to let children know that Jesus Christ was trans because of the Imago Dei perspective. That is what is really occurring here, is an attack on Imago Dei. Now, for those of you that like aren't really into Christianity and you don't understand kind of like what it is that I'm saying when I say Imago Dei, is the image of God. Now, this comes from Genesis 1:27 NIV. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them, right? And this is the foundation for human rights in Christendom, long before the Enlightenment. The idea being that human beings are created in God's image leads towards several things, right? It leads towards this idea of rationality and reason from both like from a Aquinas perspective, the logos, the idea that humans are God's children and deserving of equal rights and special in kind of the hierarchy of the kingdom. This is one more kind of step of attempting to attack and subvert religion with a philosophy of deconstructionism and trying to put in new ideas that are explicitly against the biblical texts themselves. Now, I'm not a Christian, I'm an atheist, but I think it's incredibly problematic when you do not immediately gatekeep with rage and push these people off of your property when they start to try and subvert foundational philosophies and ethics with a leftist and evil philosophy of contradictions that are clearly present in this idea of Jesus Christ having a trans body. And if I was a Christian, I would be incensed even more. It is absolutely heresy, and it is absolutely evil, and it is doing everything it can to destroy Western civilization.
Oh wow, we're gonna have fun with this, right? Okay. All right, so we'll go on to the next person. Isle. I said check your Discord DMs, please. Thank you.
Oh,
Go
me?
ahead. Yeah.
The
You.
other aisle.
Is that your name, Isle?
Oh,
Who else is named Isle?
okay. I'll
Go
check
ahead.
this again. Okay.
Ty.
Yeah, so this one is going to be interesting. I've got to make a disclaimer as I start this because while I find religion interesting, I don't really like most religions in their current iteration. I wish Western religions were a little bit more like the Eastern ones, particularly like Shintoism, Taoism. Like a lot of these are more philosophies. And while I hate most of the Eastern religions' philosophies, is that they're not overly hyper dogmatic, and where they really kind of go their own way is that they're not deified, which is incredibly important because you're not trying to answer the whats and the hows and the wheres of like the common reality that we all have. It's that they're answering like the whys and the shoulds, and basically it's a moral template. So my thing is like when somebody's like, oh hey, I'm gonna try to like justify transgenderism through religion, I don't give a shit. Because quite honestly, this is not something that religion should even have a remote iota in what it does. What religion should be is a principled form of ethics on why you should treat people a certain way and how you should treat them that way. The problem I keep having is that people want to basically use religion to explain what science already kicks its ass with. And so when it just comes down to it, it's like, I have no problem talking about the morals and ethics of religion. I think that's actually what its purpose of it is within all of human history, and it does a very good job of that. But it trying to explain how the universe works, particularly this kind of thing, this is going to be a disaster waiting to happen. So appreciate the attempt. I think this will probably blow up in its face.
Let's go to Isle.
I agree very much with Scott. I think this is kind of evil creeping in at the gates, trying to pervert what is true. But, I believe that since it's on a college campus, I think that, and I'm someone who values free speech, I believe that it's totally fine for anybody to have any sort of academic inquiry they want. If they decided to, for some reason, that they decided to look at paintings of European femboy Jesus and say, you know what, that looks trans to me. I mean, okay, I guess. But, I'm Catholic, and and what I believe is, the Nicene Creed, and I can cite it for you at some point. Let me just bring it up and I can show it to you. Okay, I thought I had the link, but
I'm sure
lost it.
Aiko can do it for you.
Oh no, I found it. I have it.
Terrible Catholic doesn't even have the Nicaea Creed memorized.
Got the link. though.
Unironically true.
Got the link.
I have it. I know because I just wanted a specific excerpt about Jesus. It's like, I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born for the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father, through him all things are made. And then it goes further to saying that, he was incarnate of the Virgin Mary. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried, blah, blah, blah. He came back. So I believe that, that those things don't necessarily are, something that denies that he was trans, but it doesn't say he was trans. So I don't think that it's necessarily something that's like, oh, like something so crazy that someone can believe. Like, people believe Jesus is black for some reason. People believe that Jesus is Chinese. Like, if you go to Chinese churches, like, every culture, like, adopts Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And so they have a little version of them. Like, if you go to Vietnam, like, I think that was a joke in like like a buddy cop movie, like with Vietnamese Jesus. I forgot what movie it was, but so I have no problem with the academic inquiry. I just think that it's wrong, and I think that this is clearly a plot of evil. But it was so comical this time that it's not even a real concern to me. And so I'll to my turn right now.
I love watching Larry Twitter like shake his head, right? He's like, yeah, the only Jesus I recognize is clearly Nordic, right? Like, where else would Jesus have come from?
All the pictures I saw, he's got blonde hair.
Blue eyes.
It's weird that he's mistaken for Ewan McGregor a little too often, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Okay, all right. Well, maybe we should deal with that another day.
Jesus looked like me.
Sure.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. He looked more like Saddam Hussein. There was like a thing that like they did like a reconstruction. What he probably looked like. He looked like Saddam Hussein when they finally did that. All right, let's go to Aiko. Aiko, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm shocked and horrified that you came up with this topic. I don't know where you got it from.
I forgot to say that it was Aiko was actually the one who forwarded this to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just damn it. Now it's my fault that we're doing this. Okay, so I was going to disagree with Isle there until he saved himself at the end. So he cited the Nicene Creed and then said, okay, well, there's nothing in there that said he's not trans, but there's nothing there that says that he is, and that's right, because you can't really say, based on the wording of the Nicene Creed, you can't really say anything about it. In fact, the Catholic Church today says that one of the Trinity, which is the Holy Spirit, has the feminine aspect. So there is a feminine gender within the Trinity, and in part that's evidenced by the Nicene Creed. But that's neither here nor there, because before I get to what I was going to talk about, when Fabian talked about somebody saying that Jesus was trans because of the image of God, I think, just to clarify, I think what that argument is, because I've heard this before, and it's not a new argument, it's an ancient argument, although they wouldn't use it in modern terms of talking about transness or whatever. But it's the idea that God like transitioned from this sort of spiritual element to becoming human. I think that's one of the arguments that gets made. And I guess the other argument that Fabian was alluding to is that if both man and woman were made in the image of God, then there must be some feminine aspect inside of God. And of course, since we know that the Holy Spirit has the feminine aspect, at least according to Catholic doctrine, then there is something to that. And the reason I bring all of that up is because I think that this sermon has there. If I were going to steel man it, I would say that there are some elements of it that make sense. Now, this person makes clear that he's not talking about the historical Jesus being a trans person. That was clarified. It's in the article that Prime linked. That's not the argument that he's making. I think he's making more sort of a cultural argument that if you look at 14th century art, you can see painters that are alluding to elements of femininity in the presentation of Christ. Now, that doesn't mean anything, I mean, with regards to scripture or doctrine or dogma or anything like that, or even, and it certainly doesn't talk about the historical Jesus having those elements. But this is not a new concept, and you don't have to limit yourself just to looking at art. If you look at Julian of Norwich, for instance, 14th century, currently an Anglican saint, feast days on May the 13th, cited in the Catholic Catechism as an authority, said this about Jesus. The mother can give her child to suck of her milk, but our precious mother Jesus can feed with himself, and does not courteously and most tenderly with the blessed sacrament, which is precious to all true life. The mother can lay her child tenderly to her breast, but our tender mother Jesus can lead us easily into his blessed breast through the open side, and show us where there is part of the Godhead and the joys of heaven and the inner certainty of endless bliss. This is the same argument being made by a saint about making the wound of Christ as precisely what's being said in the sermon. So we can dismiss it. We don't have to. Certainly, we don't have to accept it, and I certainly would never make any sort of historical argument with it, but we can't pretend that it's like a new concept. Also, like in the first and second century church, you had many concepts of Jesus as sort of being beyond gender and presented in that way. Specifically, the idea that Jesus is the Word, and the Word, and also the word wisdom, for instance, both in Greek and in Hebrew, has a feminine aspect to it. So if wisdom or the Word becomes a human, then you're talking about something with a feminine aspect becoming Jesus, like materially Jesus. Again, none of this has to do with historical Jesus. These are all, in my view, metaphors, but they're well-worn metaphors that you can see throughout the history of Christianity. Paul himself even says that in Christ Jesus, there is neither man nor woman, nor Jew nor Greek.
Nor slave nor free as
this
well.
Yes, yes.
This is, yeah, well, there are slaves though. But this is one of the longest intros we've had so far. Let's
That's
guys,
the sermon itself.
let's, yeah, right. Here we go. Let's see if we can get to open panel. Corey, please.
Firstly, thank you, Aiko, for bringing this topic. I look forward to discussing it. I think there's potentially a lot of interesting things that can prop up. But first of all, I take offense to the wording of the question. A Christian researcher is like an oxymoron to me. That's the real heresy in my mind. And they say lefties are the snowflakes, and yet, like, based off this article, like, people were like just in tears, like, how dare you allude to whatever something vaginal like on Jesus? Oh my goodness, my world. I don't know anything about the world anymore. It's just shattered. But regardless, I echo a lot of the things that Tiberius spoke about. I'm not a religious person myself, and if anything, I'm probably more anti-religious. But to answer some of the questions in the prompt, as in, like, is there value in this type of academic inquiry? I take issue with that wording. I don't put this in the vein of academic inquiry myself, but maybe I'm too gatekeepy of academic inquiry. And also, do I think this is indicative of the leftist movement that has gone too far? I don't think. I think I view this as something separate, and I think that I'm hoping it has absolutely no effect, either positive or negative, on the trans liberation movement. And I'll just wrap up by saying, when it comes to research, do I care whether research is offensive? No, but I think research and science should be guided by ethics and morals. And I'll leave it there.
When I was writing the question, I had actually a similar thought about that on the academic inquiry thing. But I was like, the rest of the world recognizes it, so I'll let this in. All right, let's go to our friend MVP Joe Lewis, who managed to make it here. We're very happy to have you, friend. So you can introduce yourself if you'd like, and then the topic.
Yeah, no, I'm Joe. That's all kind of you need to know. I was curious about this, so I talked to some priests. I talked to my priest, I talked to my deacon, and I kind of just just threw it out there, like, what their thoughts were on this, and we had a decent back and forth. So it was an interesting conversation, to say the least. The takeaway that I had with talking to them, and kind of a position that I hold, is that it is possible that Jesus took form to people in different depictions of art and what have you, and sort of artistic expressions in like a myriad of ways. So it's reasonable to believe that Jesus came forth or appeared to people in various depictions. And even in sort of like I'm trying to paraphrase like 3 hours worth of conversation, but basically like in the sort of like arguments that they were sort of presenting to me, generally like it's basically an argument of genitals. And on one hand, unfortunately, in the Bible, there's no depictions of or representatives of God
Jesus
as man.
junk.
Well,
Sorry.
no, there's Jesus. Well, of like God is man, right? So like the only time that God ever like came about in flesh was in John 14. Other than that, there's nothing else. It's just like vague allusions to physical form. And then even when it comes to Jesus, he only appeared after his resurrection something like 10 times. The one of note that people talk about is obviously the one like the morning of Easter and then later in Galilee. But generally speaking, when it comes like to this topic, sure, like it's possible that Jesus appeared in art in different representations based on how people interpret scriptures, but the Bible doesn't say explicitly anything about trans people. But I will say that there are settled habits of thought and action around Jesus Christ insofar as people very heavily interpret him as a man and a man, period, in genitals and in identity. So that's kind of an institution you'll kind of have to like crack through if you're interrogating these kind of ideas. Because there's a lot of Christians and Roman Catholics who are very fixed on this idea that Jesus was a man and not budging from the argument, and not even like opening their hearts and minds to the discussion. All in all, like that's their choice to make. I don't think this has any sort of ramifications except like within religious communities having conversations about it, which I think is healthy. I think it's very healthy for priests, deacons, anybody of any people of any faith of like exploring interpretations of Christ, interpretations of God, and what have you. So I think it's an important conversation to have. I just don't know if people are ready to have it, or if they ever will be. Might just be something you kind of just like keep internally.
I don't die.
I'm absolutely shocked that Christianity, let alone most of the Abrahamic religions, haven't picked up the concept of avatars from Hinduism. Because, like, unironically, I know a lot of theologians that actually like embody some of the tenets of this, to where I can't remember what denominations would actually say this, but they're like, God is omnipresent. God is man and woman. God is I think some of you guys were alluding to this with some of the things that you were saying regarding the proclamation that you were talking about. And I apologize, I can't remember exactly what you were calling
Nicene
it.
Creed?
Yes. Because there are a lot of of theologians throughout Christian history that have referred to God in the omnipresent, that it is any and all things. And unironically, if you do believe that, then God can be trans. But this is going to turn into a theological debate, which is going to be fun because I don't really care too much. So,
well, what I'm thinking is that since I don't think any of us here actually believe that the historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth that was, around BCE 0 to like BC like 30 something was a trans person. So I think maybe we could play around with what Aiko was saying about allegorically having the feminine inside of God, even though you would normally think God as a masculine figure, but there's different feminine aspects, and it sometimes gets played with through different cultures and different theologians as they try to explain God, what it means to them and what it means to their communities. So
Corey,
maybe
Yes.
I thought you were
So-
done. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Corey.
Yeah, if you want to finish your point, go for it.
I'm just trying to just set like what we should actually talk about, because I don't think any of us doubt that the historical figure of Jesus was a cisgender man, do we?
Well, so
Even the person in the article doesn't argue that.
Yeah.
Well,
There's
I'll
some,
try-
there's some people that do, but presumably not any of the people involved in the article.
But yeah, maybe just to clarify what exactly you mean of historical figure, Isle of Isle. So,
The historical.
yeah,
Jesus.
well, so, I just want to ask a couple of questions. Like, so, yeah, so you believe whatever Jesus, like, Jesus was a person that existed, okay, and presumably you believe that they're a cisgender man. So do you also believe that they were resurrected?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where like being transgender, the bridge too far, but resurrected, that's
No,
in your wheelhouse.
no, it's not about bridge.
That's the historical figure,
Not a
like
trans.
resurrected, but definitely not transgender. That's like
That's not a bridge too far for me. It's just, you're a cisgender male. I'm a cisgender male.
I never said that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Sorry.
Well, you did. Now it's weird. Anyway.
No, I'm just saying that I don't believe that the historical figure was trans, but I think we can play with the allegorical truth, or claim that there's a femininity in God, even though you would normally think he was masculine. But there might be a femininity that we can talk about that lots of people have been seeing throughout the millennia.
Well, it is doctrine that there's a femininity in God,
Yeah.
right? Because the Holy Spirit is feminine. So
Exactly.
that's already, we don't even have to argue that.
I mean, yeah, he's omnipresent. Oh, sorry, like omnipresent, omnipotent. Why can't it be omnigender? I think that's perfectly fine.
Wait, but that's like a different. Okay, never mind. I'm not gonna.
Back to it.
Yeah,
I mean, can we all agree that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
fucking start there.
I was gonna say that. So, like,
Yes.
like when we're talking about like
Okay.
Jesus being like seen as like masculine, for historically, we've kind of seen it this way, as Joe was saying. Like, that kind of comes right out of the Nicene Creed, right? I mean, the only begotten Son, he fucking. Hold on.
Right.
Rose
So
from
I
the
don't think.
dead.
I don't think
Ascended.
the important thing.
Are you learning on the fly, Lactoid?
No, so I'm trying to find.
important-
I'm trying to find like a specific
important-
sentence, and my eyes are
the
jumping on
important-
this.
The important thing about the Nicene Creed, right, is that this is coming from Constantinople, right? This is coming hundreds of years after Christianity is a religion, right? This is kind of like setting the creed, and picking Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, like picking which books are to be included in the Bible and which are not to be included in the Bible, etc. Like, obviously there's still some disagreement about like the Apocrypha and things like that, but nevertheless, right? And so, like, what are the Gospels? And what's also important to recognize is what is inspiring the art in question, because most of the art in question that depicts Jesus Christ as having feminine characteristics is like pagan inspired, Grecian inspired, not necessarily Roman inspired, right? And so we understand that there are certain cultural kind of like ways that art is depicted. And so when you get a more Roman kind of influence on the art, you're going to get a more masculine Jesus, right? And as we move into when we move into Middle Ages and things like that, even more so. The problem here is not, is Jesus Christ trans? That is like kind of the radicals of the TRAs. The problem is, why is this discussion why are we having this specific discussion? And the lefties might get mad at me and go, "Oh, are you or are you not free speech?" I'm all for private property in this regard, and I'm all for gatekeeping. And Trinity College is a weird place because Trinity College has always been both kind of a religious center, while also, since its founding in 1823, been open to all religions, right? Which is, it makes sense that this conversation occurred at Trinity College, right? This isn't like Duke, but at the same time, this isn't like just like a regular liberal arts school that isn't like religious in some regard. The problem is like, why is the conversation being had, and what are the motivations behind it?
Well,
And ultimately, you can't know what the motivations are. You have a belief about what the motivations are. It's my belief that when people start putting together presentations to kind of like subvert and talk about the gender identity and the gender and the feminine at play, and that you find all of these people deeply offended, right, that this conversation was designed to provoke and subvert the religious sentiments of the individuals around gender ideology. I can't prove that. I simply can't, because I wasn't there and nobody recorded it.
I have
le-
no idea what that was all about. Like,
Yeah,
we can recognize that sermons are discussions of particular topics, and the person conducting the sermon can decide how it goes. Like, and even then, like, the sermons are not supposed to be structured in some type of way to feel one way or another about a particular issue. It's generally to like pose certain questions, and those questions lead you to having conversations with priests or other like figures within your religious community.
I wanted to finish really quickly what I was saying because my eyes are jumping on the page, right? But like when I'm reading through the Nicene Creed, like it's very clear, like constantly referring to like it became man, he, begotten son, son. Like isn't this even the philosophical like you could say like men can be feminine, I guess, but like to say
It's
that the
very
stab
clear.
wound was like a vagina, that seems kind of like a step
It's
too
very
far.
clear even within Roman Catholicism that gender and sexual orientation are separate from each other. But that's something that like
Well, but hold on.
I mean you can prove all you want. Like I don't know what to fucking tell you.
No, I'm
Like,
saying
It's
that
very
like-
clear.
like,
It's
says
clear, very clear.
Says the atheist, but whatever.
So you're saying it's very clear in Roman Catholicism that gender and sex are two totally different things. Do
I
you have
said
any
gender and
sources
sex.
for
I
that?
said gender and sexual orientation. I can
Wait,
my
why,
priest-
why,
Okay,
why is sexual
and the-
orientation
What is-
relevant here?
Why are you okay? Sexual orientation is not relevant. Like if you're saying sexual okay, cool. That doesn't mean anything.
Are you saying he was
You
like
just-
Jesus was gay as well? I mean, I don't understand what the point is.
Obviously, gender and whether or not you're gay are two separate things. No conservative has attempted to link these things. Not of any regard or respect.
Well, so,
I-
so
I'd
Go
love to
ahead.
finish what I'm saying, but you can go.
no, like I
No,
wanna
it's
give you-
over. It's over. It's good. It's good. I see the bait,
Uh,
and we're not gonna humor it. We
Fair
can
enough.
move on from that.
But
Okay.
Lactoid, you're reading like I'm definitely not a biblical scholar, far from it. But like you're reading something like in English. Like I don't know like how much that I don't think you're reading the original Bible, regardless.
So I have one in Greek. We can go. I can go
The
take a- I
creed, the
can't read
crazy.
Greek, though.
I guess like if I'm understanding what you're trying to say is that based upon the pronoun identification of Christ, that's reasonable to deduce that Christ was man. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well,
Or
it,
like,
well, it
yeah.
quite literally says for our
I'll
salvation.
ask the question again. So based on the pronoun identification
Jesus
of
Christ.
Christ, I mean, I just want you to
Yeah,
answer the
I was in
question.
the middle of answering it. Like,
Right,
just
but
put a
you can
yes
just
or
say
no,
you
huh?
can you can just say yes or no.
Yeah,
Like,
so that's part of it. The other thing that like makes up my belief here that I think is relevant to mention
okay.
was like where it states, "For our salvation came down from heaven and was incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man."
Wait
Like,
a minute.
literally became
Wait a
man.
minute.
But that's
Wait
not
a
enough.
minute.
Okay.
There are two words that get translated as man. One is anthropos, which just means human, and that's the one
Yes.
that's what's being referred to in the Nicene
Okay.
Creed. If it had meant man as the sex, then it would have said the difference between a misanthrope and misandry.
Which is why I said
Misandry
what I
would
said.
be people who hate
What
men.
about son and daughter?
Um,
Are those different terms in Greek?
No, those are the same terms. Although at the time, like for instance, you constantly get these references to brother that might mean brother or might mean
Mhm.
like somebody else. Like it's a little bit fuzzier in Koine Greek than it is in English. But I still would argue that the general terminology that you see in here definitely alludes to a male gender and as
Sure.
opposed to a feminine gender. But I just don't think it's as cut and dry as
Yeah,
most
it's not
people are
as
saying.
like, and that's even like the takeaway that I got earlier talking about this, because it's just like it's not fixed, but again, like there's a lot of subtle thoughts of habit of just like that Christ is man, and man not only in gender identity, but also man and all the things that like make up the sexual orientation we believe to be a man. That was my point earlier, but
Yeah, he was
No,
so much
like-
more than just.
I don't think
he's categorized. That's what it.
I don't think
God.
I don't think Eastern Romans were trying to be vague or subtle about the fact that Jesus was a man.
Well, so
No, I just don't think it was an issue. Like
Yeah,
uh,
and they
Right.
didn't understand.
It was just it
gender
was
theory.
obvious that he was a man, right? Gail Rubin hadn't made queer theory yet. Like
Well-
few generations behind.
what? But we
I
can
posted
we can
side-by-side
recognize.
translations in
Never
chat,
mind.
by the
We're
way.
not gonna take this bait. All right.
So no, but no. So like my critical. So okay, the man. I understand that, right? But
Mhm.
I just want to if you could just talk about it a little bit more between son and daughter. Okay, the Nicene Creed. Could the statement, the word that they use for son, be translated to daughter or no?
No, I wouldn't. No,
No.
I wouldn't translate son and daughter.
Okay, so
No, I
when it's
don't think
referring
they
to like only
are
begotten,
swappable.
sure. So when it's referring to like when the creed is referring to only begotten son,
Yes, I think it's more reasonable to gender son and daughter than it is to gender anthropos.
fair. Okay, so that's I'm not up to date on my Greek. Thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying.
But
Sure.
so just what Scott brought up earlier of why we're having the conversation, I think there's also like a larger, maybe philosophical discussion, like why does this trigger like Christians so much? Like why does it bring them to tears? And like, I think this speaks to maybe like the rigidity of religion, where to what I think Joe brought up earlier, which is great that you're able to have that lengthy conversation with your religious figures. But I think as you alluded to, like, it doesn't seem like everybody's ready to have that conversation. Which I think that says something about either religious thought or this particular religion in general. Whereas, like, comparing, contrasting, other figures of, a philosophical movement, like, it seems like people really care about whether, Jesus was an actual man. But, if you compare it to, I don't know, maybe like Socrates, nobody really cares whether he was a man or not. Or like, did he actually die through poisoning himself? Like,
Well, this is
why does it? Go
Well,
ahead,
this
Joe.
is why, this is why for me, like, I wish we had the full context of what the sermon is, because I do believe that you're going to have different news syndicates and people reporting this or trying to create some level of sensationalism around these ideas because they are hot topics politically right now. So, and that's my concern, where it's like something that could easily be just like a simple thing that happened in passing and maybe one or two people are upset, and they can easily just turn that into something that's huger, and we have no context to source from to be like, okay, this is what was said and this is the. Well, I'd love to this individual to come out, what's his name, Heath something, like, to be able to like speak upon what he said, because he does have to write those, like, you do have to write your sermons down, so this information is available.
Well, the opposite could be true as well, right? Like that we could be downplaying this.
We're not, but like,
well, okay, so we assume that the left wing narrative is true and that the right wing narrative.
There's no left wing narrative about this. Like, look at the sources that were cited on this, and even if you look it up, it's like you're not going to find this on a mainstream source.
So you have all the information. You just admitted that you don't have all of the information of the sermon, and then you're saying it must be sensationalized by media in the direction that I prefer. And I simply say, well, it could also be be played down in the opposing direction. And then you go, well, we're not, because I know.
Let me try this again. Trans issues are a hot topic in the political discourse, so it's likely something as simple as a sermon can get conflated as a larger issue. Even the wording of the very topic itself was doing that sensationalism. And I understand that this is a panel and like prime time, and like I know how Prime words questions, so I'm used to it at this point, but it's something that's absolutely possible. But again, like when I was looking at these sources, like different people talking about these it doesn't seem like there's this like larger buzz of it. And like we can't make the argument that it's early. You know what I'm saying? But
I think he's just
like
making I think he's making
ways,
a simple point though, right? I think what he's trying to say is that like why do people react in this way, right? Aiko gave us a lot of a good context, right? Like, why do people react in this way? Well, if we have a history of people talking about like the male femaleness of Jesus Christ, right? And that like it has there's female aspects to the Holy Spirit. Well, this isn't like a new thing, right? But like in our current context, like that evokes the idea of being trans, right? And trans equal bad, right? And how could you associate my Lord with that thing? But beyond that, if that's the same conversation had taken place, right, 40 years ago, then maybe we wouldn't get this reaction. It's like, oh, okay, well, this is interesting. Maybe I don't sign on to this, but you don't have the same reaction. The outlook of this is colored through the current conversation, current debate on trans individuals, obviously, right?
Well,
Yeah.
100%. Like if 20 years ago, if someone had a rainbow flag in their classroom, yeah, some Christians might be mad, but it wouldn't be like a viral fucking thing that like libs of TikTok needs to point out. There's a larger context of
I mean,
of queer theory being put into schools, and so like people are looking for the symbols of it. They're looking for the instantiation of that philosophy. I think the same thing is true with this instance. We don't know. We don't know what the sermon said, right? We all we know is that they said that's not really what I was saying. And then people there were crying and saying that he was alluding to transness or stating the transness of Jesus Christ. Like I would love just as much as Joe to have the actual sermon that is written down so that we could like more accurately see what it is that they're saying. But it is also a question of like, why are you having this conversation now and what are your motivations for it?
well, I mean, the very article that cited is that the sermon's exploration of nature and religious art in the spirit of is a thought-provoking academic inquiry was in keeping with the open debate and dialogue at the University of Cambridge. That's directly from the direct mail article. So I understand that even within his credentials, it's reasonable to believe that his divinity studying is based around art and how it relates to Christ. But again, I just want the sermon because maybe
Yeah.
people just didn't catch that vibe.
Right.
I want to ask you. I think the most ridiculous part of the whole story, and the one where the woman got really angry about, was like the depiction, or like it's the explanation of a spear wound as
Right.
a vagina.
Yes.
And this idea of like, well, Jesus could be penetrated through the ribs. Like this idea is
Right.
like kind of like bizarre. I looked. I mean, the painting doesn't.
Yeah, it kind of
it
assumes that
looks
he
like a
lost his
spear wound.
virginity from that spear too, right? Because something went in. Right. Like I can see the imagery of that being disturbing to people listening to that.
Well,
Religion will-
but hold on. But we know he got. Hold on. Christians don't have a problem with the idea of Jesus being stabbed. We know he was stabbed,
Yeah.
right? Like, so
But
it's more
they
along the lines of like,
do.
this is a vagina. Like that's
But
kind of
the
But they do have
sexualizing
a
of it.
yeah, they do have a particular issue with the idea, like, because I didn't really even think about this angle until it was hit with me earlier today, of that it's possible that some people may interpret the idea of him bleeding down his leg in the way that he is at some level of like his body being depurified, or I forget the exact language that my priest gave me, but I was like, damn, man, that's a way to look at it, and that might upset some people. Like, especially those who are really attached to the ideas of like womanhood and fraternity and stuff like that.
But also remember that quote that I cited from Julian of Norwich. Look, this is in it. This was in an Anglican church, and Julian of Norwich is an Anglican saint, and she specifically says talks about
Our mother Jesus.
well, Jesus's sweet open side, which to me implies the stabbing of the spear in the side. So and gendering Jesus in that way. So this is in the tradition of an Anglican saint. So it's not,
Yeah.
like I said, this is not a new concept that this person is talking about. It's just a concept that maybe people haven't really thought about for 700 years.
Yeah.
And now it's
Um,
getting a new revival in a strange times, and I think people are just not ready for it.
I don't.
Listen,
I don't
Christianity
think this
has
is
a
revival.
2,000-year history, so
Yeah.
you can find a lot of weird, unusual shit
Yeah.
going through old like Christian texts.
Yeah.
The problem is that you have two separate things here. One is you have the anecdotal sermon that is isolated to the sermon. And then you have, like PrimeCayes mentioned, the greater conversation around gender and queer theory in the culture. And so are the two connected is something that nobody here knows, right? Because nobody knows the intention of the person that gave the sermon, and we don't even have the whole sermon, so we don't even have the greater context, right? Now, I could say, as I have, right, that I think that this conversation being brought up now on the college campus, in my opinion, is something that is subversive and part of a problem that should be gatekept in terms of the way that the current conversation is going on. And Joe could say the exact opposite, which is, hey, like this is an important conversation. I don't know if we're ready to have this conversation. I think it might be sad if we're not ready to have this conversation, but we should be able to have this conversation. But the problem is it linked to the greater conversation? And I think it is, and undeniably so, because you can't separate those topics from what is occurring, right? So, like, if I do a research study on IQ differences between race and I'm purely academic about it, I might be able to come up with facts. I might be able to back up what it is that I'm saying, but there's a greater conversation that might, I don't know, piss off certain people everywhere if I start talking about racial IQ study, right? Like, there's a greater conversation that is a part of this.
The
Well,
sermon
yeah.
addressed the image of Christ depicted in art and various interpretations of those artistic portrayals.
Yeah,
And, al- and
From
also,
the article itself
uh,
that was
yeah,
cited
I
for
think
this
those
conversation.
artistic portrayals can, have their artistic merit because it's on a academic campus, and so if we're gonna do like art, art history and divinity studies, those are two different majors that those, so it's interdisciplinary. So I have my own beliefs and my own convictions, and I'm strong enough in them that I can entertain like these allegorical conversations. And so I think there's nothing wrong with having this being on the campus and when this sermon being held. I'm just more concerned about why were people crying, like, so I would
Because
just
people are snowflakes. There's your answer. And
yeah,
they
so
feel very particular about their Christ.
yeah,
And
that may be true.
any sort of challenge
Christians
about
feeling particular about Christ.
It's
It's almost like it's the whole point.
Yeah, true. So so I would like to listen to the hear the sermon, or at least have a read transcript of it to know what was said. But because that just stokes my curiosity. But I think there's nothing wrong with having the conversation as long as we just have our own thoughts about the matter, and we get to like enrich ourselves, because that's what being on college campuses is at the end of the day: having difficult conversations, getting through it, and growing as a person.
I don't understand that word vomit you said, but let me ask a question that might be able to censor this idea. So you're okay with this sermon in the context that it's a sermon in an educational context? Is that what you're trying to say right now?
Yeah, it's an education.
it's not a lecture, as far as I know.
It's a
No,
sermon.
it's a
I'm trying to
sermon.
figure out, like,
So
do
it's
you hold the exact same opinion if a priest who was in the same line of study as this individual did this exact same sermon based on what we know now? Like, or do you like hold that to a different regard? That's in a college setting.
if a priest did mass and his homily had similar.
We're talking about sermons. We're talking about sermons. I'm the ball, friend. I'm the ball. We're talking about sermons.
Okay, so yeah, if it was a sermon, yeah, I'd say the same thing. Like, if like they
cool
were
with it?
picking, and I'm cool with it.
All right,
If
bet.
in the sense that they're talking about these art histories and this 700 years histories of like the female aspect of the Holy Spirit and things of that nature. Yeah.
And yeah, Scott, it seems like at least from what I understand, like you were attempting to like link it to something else of the larger conversation. But like, yeah, this is as far as I gathered from the article. Like, it's a sermon. This wasn't a lecture, and like this is like it seems like it takes place like in the concept of like church worshipers. And I think there's a fair degree of overlap between those who are religious and those who are on the political right. I don't think that's like a huge stretch. I don't know that it's like equally like 50-50. Or like I don't like you're right. We don't know for sure the motivations, but I think given the demographic and given the fact that this appears to be like explicitly, sort of a religious whatever location on a whatever academic campus, but like, and this was a religious demographic, I think it's fair to say that it's largely like right leaning.
I mean, it's hard to tell. It's Trinity College. Trinity College is a liberal. I mean, it's a liberal arts college that has been non-denominational for like ever.
So like,
right. So it's probably more centrist, maybe right leaning.
But that's not even a good metric, right? Like DePaul is like one of the most left-wing universities there is, and that's technically a Catholic university.
Hey,
right. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I would have to look at research to determine the political affiliation of the people there. I wouldn't suspect that it is like a very right-leaning place in any. Right?
Yeah, I wouldn't suspect that
like,
either. But.
It might be right-leaning, but my question is again, kind of, I think the question that we all have is like, well, what the fuck was said? Right? Like we have the person defending themselves saying that it was innocent, right? And then we have people saying it wasn't innocent. I was brought to tears and needed to protest and contact the media because of how absurd this was. And is it churchgoers overreacting? Is it obfuscation from the individual that did the sermon? I don't know. What I do know is that we are in a culture war where the idea of gender itself is under attack from every angle and from every social institution. And so obviously people are primed to offense. And so could that mean that they're more likely to be offended by this when it was innocent? It is possible, right? But like, and that becomes the anecdotal evidence of this specific incident. But the question then becomes, why was this person giving this sermon? And then also, why are people offended and primed for that offense? It's almost like there's a problem here, a greater conversation.
Lactoid. So it took me a little while to find it because I don't have my Liddell Scott here, which is the more exhaustive of the Greek dictionaries. But I did find something online that I just put in the Streamcast chat.
Yeah, I'm reading it.
So the word "gaion," which is the words for son that's being used in the Nicene Creed, can mean son or can mean child. So although I would still argue that the force of the gender implication that's being used isn't exactly gender neutral. I would say that there's a implication of masculinity there. There's nothing in the language that anchors you to that
I mean, that's interesting. I'm reading it now. I see what you're saying, but what about I mean, I guess the final one is what Joe said, right? The pronouns, right? There are different pronouns.
There are
she.
no pronouns in Greek. So I'd have to go back and look and see.
Yeah, I
The way
can't
that we mean them.
I can't imagine any historical interpretation that the people of Constantinople were, fluid intentionally and subtle about whether or not Jesus was the Son of God.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Right, like at that point, we're just utilizing
something.
I would say that they were less obsessed with sex and gender than we are in the 21st century. So it just wasn't an issue for them.
Something that I do find interesting is if you do like a sort of like a link tracking, it goes back to Joe Biden in 2022. It's like in March. Biden saying some cool things, right? What else is new? He mentioned in I don't know what this is, but basically New York Post says Biden says trans people made in the image of God, parents must affirm identity. And it's doing like the thingy, and it says, I want you to know that your president sees you. He later goes on and says, made in the image of God and deserving of dignity and dignity, respect, and support. I'm assuming that's it's referring to trans people directly. So I could see that if you
that vocabulary is very Catholic, by the way.
Yeah,
deserving of dignity and all that.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's Irish when he decides to be.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
That's a whole other conversation about Irish presidents.
So here's another question. Has Jesus Christ ever claimed to be trans or non-binary?
There's no trans interpretation in the Bible.
Yeah,
there's nothing in the Bible
the
about
concept didn't exist.
So if he never identified that way, then he never self-identified in any way other than the Son of God. So if we can ascribe transgenderism to someone that never self-identified, then it destroys, at least from that religious point of view, the very idea that self-identification is a component of one's gender identity, which is an impossibility.
Never identified
that was
as God.
Jiu-jitsu.
That was something that was put on him after his death as well. We can't go too far with that, otherwise my religion falls apart.
Does self-identification matter in terms of gender identity? If he identified as the Son of God the entire time, how do we then reinterpret and put our own identity onto Christ if he never identified that way?
Well, that's a good question you ask a priest, my friend. Because I'm not too sure even like getting a little bit more sensationalist in your tone is going to change Aiko's position. But I could be wrong.
Well, again, like my position is to take all of this metaphorically, which is what I do with a lot of scripture. And I don't like, certainly if, if you were to tell me, if you were to ask me like flat out, what was the gender slash sex of the historical Jesus? I mean, I would say male and masculine, but all I'm saying is that these interpretations
who you
that
fucking
run
though?
throughout history, there are people like this is not a new concept that's being talked
Yeah.
about here. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, we don't know the fucking concept that's being like we have an overview according to the person after the fucking
Yeah,
controversy.
that's right. It's true. We don't have
you know what I mean? Like
the
like
text.
the specific language here could very drastically change something from one side to the other. If
No,
he
I
is
mean-
talking metaphorically the entire time about artistic expressions and about how like divinity doesn't really have like is made up of masculinity and femininity, and that logos is not pertaining just to the masculine energy, and like that's what he's talking about the whole time, and people like freaked out, right? Then like that's on the people freaking out because they're primed from the attack on gender. But if he uses certain words to be like, and so who knows whether or not Jesus was really a man in this capacity, and like throws in things like that, then like yeah, they have every right to be like heresy. Get the fuck off of my campus and out of my church.
Nah, but we can move on.
Well,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Corey.
So I just want to maybe learn something from Aiko, where it's like you mentioned that Jesus. I'm not a religious scholar or by any means, but yeah, you mentioned that Jesus never identified as the Son of God. Is that like correct?
No. He identified as the Son of God. He never identified as God. That was
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So given
like
that,
we're
like,
all children of God, right? So it was unclear at the time when he said Jesus is often sort of avoiding such a claim, and nobody knows why, but some people think that he was
He's a
avoiding
modest
it because
guy.
well, you didn't want to
he's
be
like,
crucified, right? Like the Romans
Yeah.
were constantly trying to trick him into saying that he was the King of Kings, that he was God, and
You mean
that
it-
that would be heresy, and then they could get him for it.
You
And
mean
so
it's
he avoided.
reasonable? Just to clarify, Aiko, you think it's reasonable to believe that, like, low key, he's like, yeah, thanks for the praise, but can you guys like kind of shut the fuck up about
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
Like-
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Yes, and so of course, after he dies, then the claims get more explicit. But at the time, he's kind of avoiding
Especially-
it. So he'll say, "Oh, well, I'm the Son of God," but of course, anybody can be the
right.
a
I
child
mean,
of God.
unless
But
like
then-
you don't believe the Gospel of Thomas is heresy. But
I mean, like,
that's a whole
especially
nother
like,
discussion.
and like then there's also like the like
But
all
he
the
was
appearances.
that was after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
But then like yeah, it's afterwards
Well,
that
they're all
you know,
after the crucifixion.
it's imposed that Jesus is also God and whatever the Holy Spirit, and that's where you get like the Trinity, right? Is it?
Well,
I'm
Jesus
understanding
is
correctly?
Jesus is an extension of God. It's not that Jesus is God. You know what I'm saying?
No, well, I never really understood.
A lot of people would take a lot of issue with that statement.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
Jesus is fully God, and God is fully the Holy Spirit. They're all
Jesus.
three are-
That's why I said Jesus is an extension of God. So
Fully
if
God and
Jesus,
fully
he
human.
is
yeah.
God. He
no,
is.
no.
Let's get into
Yeah.
it.
Not that's a totally different conversation that would like basically like
Promcast
depending on the
should have
theology.
gotten posh.
Trinity is the next.
Should have got like an actual person that likes to debate religion. Somebody like Posh or something.
Or Eucharist.
Oh, Eucharist would have been great for this. Yeah.
I did, but he's I don't know who Posh is. But
And also, like priests and people who study religion are busy, doing priest and
oh,
religion shit.
yeah, but not like
So-
important stuff though. But like so
it's almost Christmas. They're busy, okay? Like
yeah, fair enough. I'll give you that. It's a money making opportunity, of course. So
well, it's actually Easter. Easter's the big bucks. Easter's the big bucks. Christmas is where you get all the normies. Easter is where we get the long haulers. The
fair
real
enough.
donations are.
I'll take that. So this idea being like male or female, like that's the thing I wanted to talk about. I wanted to respond to Scott. Scott, you had called this an evil exercise. Are you still on that? Do you still, after this conversation so far, you still believe that like putting this out there was evil, or have you
Via balance of probabilities, I still think it's evil. Yes.
Okay, right.
Am I
And
open
what?
to the potential that this was like an innocent sermon in isolation? Yeah, of course. But I'm going in fucking hard because why the fuck is this person having this conversation now? Why are they doing it here? And if it is my opinion that this person is not engaged in like in a sermon to discuss art and metaphorically talk about these things, I think people were offended, rightly so, because I think this person is coming out
Oh,
to subvert religion.
sure. So, you're saying that like if it was indeed intended to be provocative, then it is evil. Okay. Um,
Mhm.
and specifically, it's evil because it undermines. I think you said previously the ethics or morals of this foundational religion. Is that correct?
If it's intentional, right, then the design of the subversion is queer theory, critical gender theory, right? And that in and of itself is evil. If it's
Okay.
not intended to be subversive and it's just some academic talking about artwork and metaphorically talking about, the different representations of masculine, divinity being both masculine and feminine, right? And people are just in an uproar about something that they didn't understand, then it's an
Okay.
isolated incident, but it still speaks to the larger conversation of why
Sure.
people are
I
upset.
I don't want to talk about whether gender theory is evil or not. But you might end up
I
doing that
know.
any which way. Yeah, of course, thank you. Um,
It's
I
Twitch. I get it.
yeah.
Look, you don't like
Oh,
you're careful about trans issues on Twitch and you're careful about COVID on YouTube.
Oh no,
We get it.
that's not why. Because I think this is an annoying ass conversation. I'll talk about it.
Thank
I
you,
don't
it's
give a shit.
annoying.
I don't. Yeah, it's an extremely annoying conversation. No. Okay, so I don't see how this could be evil, right? Even if this is indeed provocative, right? If it's like worst case scenario, whatever exactly that is in your mind, right? Worst case
Mhm.
scenario, I don't think you could ever describe this as fucking evil. I think that I don't give any doctrine any special protection, right? Not my doctrine, not the doctrine of like America, like the Constitution and like the beliefs attached thereof, right? And certainly not Christianity. Like there's no doctrine or that is above that sort of critical examination and
There is
reinterpretation
no
because
religion
everything
above Prime shitting on it.
exactly pretty much
There's
yeah
no religion.
exactly.
Can I
So
ask?
so hold on, and
I'm
let
an
me finish
atheist.
up, and I'd love to hear from you and Scott. Excuse me. So yeah, so this is why I can't think of that, and especially since one, I think this is less undermining the ethics and morals and more like the lore, and
The
lore changes all the time.
You
But
watch too much goddamn anime.
I do. That's exactly how Scott. That's literally exactly how I interpreted all of this. Was through the lens of anime. Like it's 100% how I did
Christian
that.
lore.
Exactly. I related to One Piece when I was reading this. So
The art stabbing wound is just the plot for
Yeah, it's just-
Christians.
but yeah, so I think that it would be healthier for Christianity, right, as a whole, to be reinterpreted to at least to a certain extent, right? But people do this, like we have these again Christian researchers. I'll do that for my man Corey. I'll scare
Thank you
quotes.
so much.
Who are
Why
doing
do we
these
have to
things,
put the quotation
and
marks?
and
It's natural. It shouldn't have-
and they're doing these they do these deep dives into the Bible and they find new connections, right? If it was a connection, right, some sort of new, a deeper connection that is outside of this larger debate of trans, whatever, then we wouldn't say anything about it. Like, oh, look at this interesting discovery, right? And maybe there's something to talk about. I don't think you would apply this as being evil if not for the gender ideology thing. So you can respond to that, and then I also want to hear from back to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think anything that seeks to subvert logic with the dialectic and with contradiction undermines the capacity for the rationality of man, and that this is the most evil thing that can be done if you are seeking to create contradictions in the world and philosophy and add subjectivity towards the world and the material world, and that is evil incarnate, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I'll deal with you later. Let's go to Lactoid and then Isle.
I'm curious. Someone was talking about how like this is healthy for Christianity. Maybe it'd be nice if Christianity would be reinterpreted this way. And somebody brought up other religions. I mean, we're talking a lot about how Christians are upset, like in this case. I think there'd be more anger, and this is just intuitively speaking. Like, let's say they made Muhammad transgender. I think that would you guys be in favor of like maybe that interpretation?
I would love it.
Nigga,
Fuck
I
'em.
don't know what the fuck. Like, what the fuck kind of dumbass question is that? Like, are any of us Shia or Sunni? We can't answer that shit. Come on now.
Well, even if there was even if Muhammad was just depicted, I think that's a problem as well. So
Yeah, let the
Yeah.
cartoonists in France figure that shit out, not us. All right.
Yeah, no, I'd be, if you're asking me specifically, would I be okay with that? Yeah, fuck yeah. And you know what? I hope it does undermine, as Scott said, undermines their ethics and stuff. I could change that shit. Sorry. But I
was
was
trying to end up in one of their cool videos. That's what they're gonna show pictures of this panel and conflate it to Americans. And they're gonna have CNN have to explain Twitch panels. to the
I'm
world.
Canadian.
The
for the
Christians-
record.
So for the Taliban
The
watching,
Christians-
I do not share their opinion. Spare me.
Listen, if there's anything that I've known about their propaganda, they are the premier clip champs, okay? They know how to clip things out of context to
For
really
anyone-
send a message.
For anyone watching, Muhammad was a pedophile, and you can take that to the bank.
Okay.
Dang.
Let's go to
I'm gonna live. You all are gonna.
Live too. I'm trying to live my
his
life.
Swedish Jesus will protect him. Let's go to Isle.
Yeah, Tiberius knows better in this conversation. Yeah, I see you quiet.
I wanted to respond to Corey because he was saying that we need to put the quotations around Christian for some reason. When I think that
I
No,
say
not
you
Christian
do.
researcher.
Yeah.
Sorry, Christian researcher. He put the quotations around researcher. I think Christians do lots of veritable research, and I think that the fields of anthropology and
Human Genome Project.
Genome Project, and figuring out the genetics.
We can talk about Francis Collins, but first of all, Francis Collins did not like himself do the Human Genome Project, but sure.
Yeah, or Catholic priests did like the bean plot, the bean plan experience.
You really want to cite Catholic priests in this conversation? I don't know if you want to really go down that road.
Multiple. No, I'm just saying that Christians do lots of research in veritable sciences. So I don't know why there's derision around Christian researchers. I think research.
And you also go ahead.
Yeah, and even anthropology to go back into biblical times and talk about what may or may not have been in the times of Jesus. That's also a veritable discipline that we can talk about and do things. I don't think that's necessarily something that should be derided.
Well, so this is all separate, but anthropology is its own discipline. It has no, it's not tied to Christianity whatsoever. Certainly there are Christian anthropologists, but and also, there's a whole breed of, whatever Christian science in the United States, and maybe some other locations of you have whatever creationist museums and all that stuff. I don't want to get into that, but there's a reason why I am sort of I took issue with Christian researcher, but I also Prime is just humoring me. Yes, you can also be a researcher and Christian, but I take it as a little bit of a joke personally.
Wait, so I want to fight about this. This seems fun.
Okay, sure.
So do you think that so the idea of Christian researchers you kind of just not down with? I'm trying to understand where the rub in the bathtub is.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. So do I
Who hurt you? This is my question.
Christians and the religious folk. No.
True, I believe it.
But I do have as someone who runs in a particular circle, and there's a little bit of
He's a real researcher. Come on, just say it. You're a real researcher.
where it's go into a room with any field of scientists or an academic conference, virtually everyone is atheist and jokes about religion are commonplace. It's very rare, and I'm not saying you find no religious people among the STEM, but they're They're pretty rare.
I
At least in my
respect
experience.
I respect the like Christian studies the most in actually anthropology, right? Christian anthropology. I think that's interesting, right? Like how it's affected societies, going through the ages. That's like a legitimate study, like any religion, right? Like all these things have an effect on us and how we've developed. So I think that's actually super interesting, and very legitimate. But
Yeah, like
but
the historical perspective, totally valid, like for sure.
Gotcha. So okay,
I would
so
I would
got a
also like
few
to point
things.
out that it is
Ty, I see
equally,
your hand.
it's equally silly to have someone that is professes socialism and consider them a researcher as well, because we know that they're brain dead, that they don't follow
Well, no,
logic,
first of all,
and we understand that they don't have
let me
ethical
clarify.
foundation.
Let me clarify.
right? So I would trust Christian researcher more than I would trust you, Corey.
Yeah, first of all, I'm full blown commie, so I never said socialist. Anyways,
Damn.
Joe, if you want to respond, you can. Then I want to hear from Ty.
I was just about to say, holy shit, Kino's here. But that's all I want to say about that. Like, you keep going.
Okay, Ty.
All right. So, three things. The first one is, Joe, I will absolutely step on some toes here. Islam can go screw itself because it got rid of the best things about its own religion 1,000 years ago.
No. Keep going.
The second thing is,
Wait, what are those best things they got rid of?
okay, remind you that whenever we're literally going through the Dark Ages, Islam was one of the most liberal and enlightened forms of any kind of religion that we had out there. They were empiricists. They had a lot of like funding of expeditions into understanding the natural world. Like this is the Tales of Edom and Tuda and a few others.
Come on, Tiberius, we get it. You bid some bets on FIFA. So what are you saying? I'm just fucking with him.
I know. Anyway, so it's like, okay, Islam fucked itself, and yeah. But as far as Christianity, I'm probably going to derail this, but I need to ask the question. We're seeing Christianity just get eviscerated in Europe, and even here in the United States, it's what 40% of the country is now some form of secular, where they don't even believe in like Christianity, and that continues to be the case more and more so. What's Christianity's critical flaw that it's got right now? Like, if I can direct the conversation there, because I've had that conversation before, but I think we're touching on it, but we haven't actually addressed it with this
I
one.
have some ideas, but
What you're asking? What's the problem with Christianity today?
Yeah,
I think
Fundamentalism.
Well, fundamental, and also, yeah, I think it's issue, or at least I think basically its effect on or the discrimination towards the LGBT community. I think that's why you see like this huge disconnect where like the younger demographic, the younger generations, they are largely identifying more and more as less religious, and they tend to be also more pro LGBTQ rights as they should be. But
Leave it to a leftist to describe the fall of religion to be based in politics and not culture or philosophy.
you're atheist. What are you talking about?
and science
Well,
as
that's
well.
culture too, right? That's primarily a cultural issue. Whether or not
people are not leaving Christianity in droves because of like LGBT legal issues. That's
I'm not saying that's the only thing.
It's because they want to sin, right? Ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, hell, if they just want to fuck.
Yeah, secularism.
And that bread is not good, all right? And you try to dip it in that juice, and it's like, it doesn't do any good then.
If they kicked up the bread a little bit, you could probably get a
Kick
few
up
more
the
people.
bread, kick up the juice.
Yeah.
Well, I disagree with Corey on that as well, but mainly because I think that the group of people who are leaving the church are not. They would leave regardless, I think.
Sure.
Because they don't find the concept of God to be like logical, whereas the group of people who are conservatives who are in the church, like they believe in more fundamental ways, and if the church starts moving to the left, yeah, that's gonna pull them away. But if it starts moving back towards them, then they'll return to the church. I don't think there's anything that's going to convince the left to come back to the church. I've spoken to too many people on the left, and if they're not, already like struggling to stay in the church, through deep readings of the gospel or whatever their reasonings might be, if they're already gone, there's no getting it back.
It applies the other way too, right? Universalism, right? They form their own churches, which are like ridiculously tolerant.
And then they fall apart.
Yeah, to piggy on something that Aiko said, I don't know how much time we have on this, but I know like even within like my ministry, like I'm the youngest motherfucker there. I'm also the only nigga there, but we'll get to that in a different topic on a different day. But it was very interesting to see how like the only reason why I even stayed remotely close to like faith in any capacity is like the relationship with my family and how my family taught like not only taught religion but like had a just like settled practices of religion. Like just we went to church, that was just the thing that we did, and I was a bit separated from it because I was in the music ministry. But even like my sort of separation from that, it was very incredible to see that like just it's old, especially Roman Catholicism. It's the old guard. And they tried to do different types of outreach and different types of like communal, like bringing people together. But then there's like so many things that the old guard, I'm saying like just the old guard of Roman Catholics in my own ministry, like just pushed back against. Like we had like the only reason why a lot of people stayed within my community was that the church had events that were church related but had different types of social aspects to it, like dances, social stuff of that nature. But then once we switched priests and they stopped doing that for the span of 8 years, and the dude was an asshole, and then it just basically killed the entire culture of like the youth ministry. And now the youth ministry is like hanging on by a handful of parents and their kids. But
Mhm.
even then, like their kids are like, I don't know if I want to do this. So
Right.
the outreach is definitely an issue.
I've got
And-
three things here. First and foremost is that when it comes to me personally, is that the thing that kills religion for me right now is the literalism. It's like I get the morals, I get the philosophy, but it's just like you are way out of your depth whenever you're trying to explain how the natural order works. The God of the Gaps is fine, but they keep getting their ass kicked where they're like, hey, you know, God does that. And then it's just like, no, it's static electricity in combination with X, Y, and Z. Like it really defangs religion because they try to assign like value to the natural world that they are not equipped to deal with.
Look, when I was younger, when I was a kid, I was Baptist. I can't tell you how many times the conversations I had were how you can fit that many animals
Angels on the
a
head
boat.
of a pen.
Well, I was thinking about animals on the boat, like
Okay.
all the stupid logic
practical
games you have to
questions.
play. If
That
you're
one guy did the
Yeah.
math, right? You could fit
Yeah.
it.
right,
Second question, or second point.
What's
for
his
me
name?
Is,
The guy who runs the museum.
all right. Second point
yeah,
for me
yeah.
that is really interesting because depending on where you are, this is not the case, but depending on where you are, it's absolutely the case. The Christian community has gotten hyper fucking toxic. There are communities that are absolutely, Westboro, that make us all go, I don't want to touch those motherfuckers. Those people are crazy. Stay the hell away from me. And unfortunately, a lot of Catholics around my particular area give Christianity a really bad name because they tend to be the true epitome of what we would call a religious hypocrite. Person who's like, I go to church, and they lord it over you, and they think that you're a bad person and that they are good people. But the final thing that I have is that I'm losing my train of thought here. I apologize. I should have wrote it down. I was trying to write it down, but I didn't get a chance. Joe Lewis fucked me up. I blame Joe Lewis.
I wanted to, and maybe it'll help you out. I wanted to actually engage with Scott. Because Scott, you talked about, and I don't want to screw up your words. The last thing you said to me, you were talking about like how religions shouldn't shift. Like, could you?
What do you mean when I say that religion shouldn't shift?
Well, anyway, like so what I said previously is that like I think religions should reimagine themselves. Like I think it would be better for Christian. Yes. If they did that, right? Like it would be actually a healthier way of looking at it. And then you had a problem with that. And you responded to me. I don't remember your exact words though.
Right. The issue that I have isn't like whether or not something is like reinterpreted because of like later knowledge, right? Like to gain a better understanding of the faith. Like I don't care if somebody discovers that like it is easier for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, and then they realize, oh, the eye of the needle is actually just a bar that is set up in Oasis to make sure that like camels don't sneak in and drink up all the fucking water. And then it's not actually like a sewing needle and thread saying that it's impossible, but saying that it is less likely. Like I don't care if new information allows them to reinterpret. What I care about is if there's ideological subversion of an ethical system, right, that is predominantly deontological, and what is added is additional elements of irrationality via contradiction, right? Like I care about that because that is against what I want, which is the eventual freeing of man to be able to utilize his rationality. Ultimately, I'm not a Christian. I don't really like, I don't want us all to become a Christian fucking nation. I want people to have the freedom to do that, but I find the Christians to be less dangerous than the leftists that refuse to ground anything in reality and are okay with logical contradictions and subjectivism
Sure.
to justify whatever evil they want.
Okay. You didn't have to do the rant on leftism. Okay? We know your feelings there.
Yeah, but
So
that's
I
the
wanted to bring
danger
in.
here.
I wanted to bring in because when you said that, like, it makes me think of two things. One, our friend Aiko, actually. I always forget the denomination that you're part of, or like the ideology you're part of. But like,
Catholic.
no, not just Catholic though. Like, it's specifically like that specific flavor where you like
He's an Opus Dei.
where like you feel that the gospel
Oh, you mean
there's
progressive revelation?
Yeah, progressive revelation, right? Where you're saying that we have a greater understanding than we did before, basically, right? So like looking
Yeah.
into the gospel,
God
there's
reveals himself over time.
God, yes, okay, right. So that's like this like reinterpretation of these religions, and then and there's another group that does what he was describing, but in a more formalized manner, and that would be the Quakers. So the Quakers, they have this text, right, which is not their Bible. It's a separate thing, right? Don't call it a Bible. They don't like that. But it's like it's like a communal work, right? Where like different Quakers, like different individuals, like just submit ideas about like the religion itself and like how it relates to like the world around them, right? Like, and they release like different editions of this, and they just like keep updating this thing. And like it has helped them like shift and change with the times. Like whatever it is, whatever like social movement you're talking about, like Quakers had done it like a decade ago. They had already like thought about it, worked it out between themselves, and like moved the ball forward, right? This is why like Quakers like banned slavery immediately, right? Like when they had control, like within certain states, right? Because they'd already figured out, yeah, this is terrible. Everyone else took decades, centuries to catch up with them. With racism, with homophobia, they were already there, right? So I love this idea of just, hey, let's use our brains and use our critical thinking skills here and apply it to this religion. Now, I don't like the religion, but like apply it to the religion, and then use it from there to do good works. Like, so I think that's really like I think Quakers are like the best of religion because of this, because they were able to constantly update themselves.
And
The problem
Actually-
that I would have about this idea is like we can go further back, right? Like we can go to Aquinas, right? And like in his works on like reason, and that reason and faith are two different ways of knowing. The issue that I have with saying that like we're going to reinterpret or reimagine or rediscover things is that if they conflict with reason and rationality, that this is heresy, like point blank period. If you're using the dialectic and you're trying to interject like subjectivism and you're trying to have logical contradictions, then you're going against the very logos that God imparted to you, and that this isn't Christendom. This is some other philosophy that is eroding your Christian faith and your text, and instead is supplanting Christianity. Like if you want to learn something new, and like we want to reimagine something, and it is rational, and that's perfectly fine. But once we start talking about like, gender abolition and things like that go against rationality, that's against God from the Christian perspective, as far as I'm concerned.
and
I just remembered what I was going to say. What was my third point? Thank you, Prime, for reminding me. One of the things that really showed where Christianity had done a lot of good in the world was that whenever I'll call it the end of the Middle Ages, you come into the early Enlightenment period, it's largely spawned out by Christian thinkers and Christian theologians who had the principles and the philosophy that in order to better understand God is that you would understand his creation, that being the world, and that they actually kind of kick off the scientific revolution, and that the best way to understand God was his creation. And they actually are some of the people that actually, ironically enough, are the people who would build out the scientific method and scientific doctrine.
Yeah, Shakespeare makes this argument. He has, so in Hamlet, you have two opposing characters. You have Hamlet himself. You have let's see, you have who is it? Ophelia's brother, who goes off to college at the same time as Hamlet, but he ends up going to Paris, which means he's getting a traditional sort of medieval education. But Hamlet ends up going to Wittenberg, which is where the sort of the Protestant revolution starts happening, and at that time, in Shakespeare's time, that was associated with the Renaissance and with the growth of science and stuff like that. So by virtue of being part of this new sort of religious break from religious tradition, you get the very kinds of things that Tiberius was talking about.
And Aiko, if I can ask you a question based off of what you mentioned earlier, where when Ty asked the question of Christianity's biggest problem, you mentioned fundamentalism. Can you sort of maybe expand a little bit on that a little bit more specifically?
Yeah. So fundamentalism is a relatively new concept in human history. A lot of people that seems kind of counterintuitive to everyone. Everyone thinks about ancient medieval peoples as taking everything literally and not having any understanding of metaphor or science or anything like this. And in fact, that's really not the case. Metaphor was sort of more deeply understood, and there are a lot of different areas that we can go into to prove that. But what happened is around the 19th century, there arose something called higher criticism, which is scientific thinking applied to the Bible, where they started saying, okay, that's when they finally figured out that it was actually 4 different strands of tradition that contributed to Genesis, and that those strands were sort of knitted together into a single book, which is why you get so much repetition in Genesis, because they're combining, cutting and pasting different books together, things like that. That was called higher criticism. And the response to higher criticism was something called the fundamentals. And it's in storage right now, but I've got a 5-volume set of the fundamentals, which was a group of tracts written specifically against higher criticism. And that's when all of a sudden there was this push, specifically in North America in the late 19th century, early 20th century, to start interpreting everything. And the word fundamental then became fundamentalism. And that was everyone just saying, nope, the book was written perfectly from beginning to end. It's one seamless. They wanted to make it seem as if it was more like the Quran, where it was just one person who wrote a single thing, and it's not. And so this idea that we can't look at metaphor anymore, that we take everything literally, that we start talking about how there were literally 2 of every animal on this boat, and there was a global flood, and all of these things. People weren't really making those kinds of claims, or at least there wasn't any pushback like that until relatively recently, when fundamentalism arose. And I think that's where Christianity sort of goes off on its own. That and prosperity gospel, which was equally damaging.
Okay.
I love to shill for this book. I'm just going to shill for it one more time. Robert Bella, he is a sociologist of religion. Well, he died before he could finish volume 2, but Religion and Human Evolution. All right. It is an amazing piece of literature. I think every atheist that says the silly, stupid shit that they do about religion should read this fucking book, because it is from an atheist perspective and actually understanding religion without just simply calling everything that is religion fundamentalism, because that is the mistake that, no offense, but this is the mistake that people like Corey do in terms of interpreting religion, is they try and imagine it through the fundamentalists' perspective instead of a more evolutionary perspective of how religion came to be and what it meant at the time.
Yeah, Prime has said something to me because I also argue that atheists, at least some of the more political atheists and fundamentalists, have one thing in common, and that is they both interpret the Bible in a fundamentalist way. And
Absolutely.
And Prime has always responded to me, yeah, that's what makes fundamentalists more based than people like me. Because I think in Prime's eyes, I'm sort of like fudging things to get around these problems by just like reinterpreting everything as metaphor.
Well, I think it's convenient at the very least that like
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for the sub ice cream. Thank you so much.
I think-
But I think it's convenient because like I present a problem and it's like, oh no, they didn't really feel that way. I mean, like it says in the text, this is what it is, right? But like I interpret it this way. It's a metaphor, and I will interpret that metaphor how I please. And it turns out everything's great. So like
that's not the argument. The argument really about it is, I think a better way to put it is that before the discovery of the scientific method, right, things were functionalist in the way that they were stated in terms of true, right? Like an arrow flies straight and true if it hits its target, not necessarily that we're talking about material reality fact. And so when the Bible is, it's not really metaphorical, and it's also not really always fundamentalist true in a scientific stance. It's, I would say, at least from my perspective, is that it is making claims about the nature of reality, and it uses metaphor and story and embellishment and sometimes fundamentalism all together to talk about the nature of reality and to make arguments about time in cycles in terms of whether or not the covenant is being fulfilled based upon what people are doing in reality as to whether or not the covenant is being fulfilled. That is what I would say. So it's not the metaphor, but it's also not the literal interpretation either. It's something that actually sits in between those two places. That is a way that humans don't think anymore.
Well, so I mean, okay, so to that point, like I have no problem acknowledging that like religion had utility in the past, and certainly for many, if not the vast majority, has utility today. But that's not, I would say that's not an argument of like to continue to like utilizing it. Where like certainly something can be useful, very useful and powerful in the past, but that doesn't mean you have to like continue using that in perpetuity. Where I think we have decent enough substitutes or things even better than religion.
Like,
but,
scientism
sure,
and communism.
not my words exactly, but I would say science, yes, but I push back against scientism, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah, there's this concept of NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. I think it was Stephen Jay Gould that came up with it, right? He was convinced that there are many functions of religion that if science were to take it over, like it wouldn't be great. And he points to periods in history in which that was the case. I think people point to Nazi Germany a lot with regards to this, but this idea that that we can't get our morality from science, or at least if we do, we have to be very careful about it. Like, for instance, social Darwinism became very popular after Darwin's theories became popular, but getting our moral cues from that scientific principle turned out not to be so great. Like, I think at least with religion, you have thousands of years of sort of iteration where there are many of horrors that have been done with religion, and we kind of, at least I hope, learn our lessons as we sort of refine it. At least if we don't go in wrong directions like fundamentalism and prosperity gospel.
Science doesn't offer moral prescriptions, which is why leftists end up finding themselves in the religion of Marxism.
Well, yeah. So I think I take your point.
that was such a sentence.
In terms of even though
It's a religion.
Even though I'm not religious, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for rooting our morality or ethics in science. I think I even said in my opening statement that science should be guided by ethics and morality, but I would say not religious morality, and to at least also whatever to Scott, and I guess props to him. Like I think it's fair to say that Scott doesn't root his ethics and morality in religion. I could be wrong, but I don't think he would describe his or moral ethical. So like I think it's possible that I think that we certainly have disagreements, but I will fully acknowledge that Scott doesn't appear to root his ethics and morality in religion. And I would say I don't root my ethics and morality in religion, and I still think you can be a moral agent and ethical agent in the absence of religion, and it doesn't have to be rooted in science either.
You're rooted in Marxism, you dirty commie. I'm not going to invite you to my
100%,
barbecue.
1000%.
I'm not going to invite you
Although
to
I
my
do think it's
barbecues
messy,
anymore.
right? Because a lot of the like ethical norms that we live by today were influenced by the religious thought of the past. And so the degree to which we've departed from that and improved or been shaped by that and improved is arguable.
Yeah, there's a great piece of literature that is extremely haunting, right? So Franz Kafka actually wrote this like 7-page letter to his father. And if you know, like I remember most everyone probably just remembers Kafka from like high school where you read that story about him turning into a bug, like the metamorphosis, right? But in his letter to his father, he has this really interesting kind of insight, which is that his father was a devout Jew, but that he never took them to synagogue, and that he just demanded that he had a religious upbringing. And so he demanded that his children kind of like follow these moral edicts without any foundation for those moral edicts, as like someone that's a generation removed from like growing up in the synagogue. And the way that it was like completely without grounding or foundation. I don't know, you should go read Kafka's letter to his father. It's dark though, just so
You
you
should
know.
just read Kafka. He's one of the best authors ever.
Maybe.
That sounds actually
I
interesting.
think one of the best authors ever is the woman who wrote the Warrior Cats series. Like they're still going on, and for the greatest literature.
I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
No,
I'm
You know,
sorry.
I end up dropping 2 authors because it's like chill and everybody's just talking. I'm like, fuck it, like read these. And aisle is just like woman, warrior, cat warriors.
Yo, no, the Warrior series are the greatest books ever. It's so great because it's about these cats that are like wild and they hunt and they fight.
This conversation is wild.
I've read this series actually. I have to say.
This shit about furries.
No,
This
they're
sounds
actual
like-
cats. They're not furries.
Okay.
They're
Fun.
what? The only people who
and they have
justify
9
animals.
lives.
The only people who justify what an animal actually is are furries. So
Scott, if you have a link to that letter, I would love to be able to look at that. If that's the thing that you can find, I don't know.
Don't worry, I'll also give you a link to the Warriors so you can read the Warriors.
I ain't reading no furry porn, friend.
It feels like it. But okay, yeah. So I like this idea.
You can't blame me on this. I didn't derail the topic this time.
You didn't. You
It's
didn't.
all my fault. all mine.
I think there is a really interesting conversation as to like how far religion should bend. And I'm interested in having that. And like
Oh,
at
Well,
what
I mean, thankfully for you, Prime, the church knows how far boys should bend. So
Oh, welp. I didn't say it. I didn't say it. So director Benson.
Hey, you know,
Yeah, I already know.
hey, you know,
We're used to it.
is there
We're
is
used
there
to it.
there's no statistical
I-
difference
it
between
was
that or
such a-
public school teachers.
it was
so,
such
you
an
know.
easy.
Joe, we got
ignore that.
Joe's
Ignore that
2
other
for
bullshit.
2
You
and
just
0,
gave me
you
that
know.
way.
Well,
You just
and,
gave me that
wait,
way.
and both of them peddle religion. So
Oh, okay, all right. We'll have to have a fight about that. This statistical
Ba-da-ba-doo-doo.
difference thing. I'd actually like to have a deeper conversation. One, I want to see that research.
That would be a great panel by itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and 2, I have thoughts on this, and okay, whatever. So we'll just move on here. This is a good time. And hey everyone, we are going to continue on to our open walk on panel right after this. So the content isn't over. I'm going to give an outro to all these great individuals, but we will still have more content, and maybe we can have that conversation about like how far religion can bend. In any case, if you've enjoyed anything that you've seen so far, and you're new here, hit that follow button. Hit that follow button right now. Make sure notifications are on so you don't go live. Do this all the time. That's for social and chat for social media because we got a lot of it. We got Twitter where we tweet. Discord will have everything, including our more compounds will be there, right? So we want you to be a part of that community, that conversation. TikTok, and then YouTube. Like, comment, and subscribe at our YouTube channel for more of that. Okay. And for anything you've missed, right? That's where you'll find the VOD. Right. So I'm gonna give an outro, but remember the content does not end. We will start Lactoid. Thanks for you continuously I feel like you continuously surprise me. You'll say things like I will not like quite see it coming. I don't have you completely figured out. I got Scott completely figured out. Not you yet. So thank you for coming through. Always adding a little bit of a I don't know, a variety here.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep you on your toes. It's the best way to build the mental muscle. In closing, Marxism is religion, and the Bar Association is a cartel. I'm telling you this as somebody who benefits from it. The sovereign citizens are right. We control you through your birth certificate. You are traveling, not driving. Make sure to tell the judge that. It will work. If you like what I had to say,
Maritime law.
if you like what I had to say, you can find me at Anti-Communism United on Discord or Twitch, or Anti-Com United on Twitter. Thanks.
All right. In fact, I think I want to make that a topic. About institutions that are that acts as like a clearinghouse for individuals, licensing institutions, right? And whether that should be a thing, and should we have like basically a singular one? I'm gonna write that down, and maybe we can have that next week.
Wait, institutions that what?
Or that do like licensing, right? Like that's for lawyers.
Like bar associations, medical boards, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go to our friend Scott. Scott, this was really chill, right? Like, I mean, the condescension never stops with you, but at the very least, I feel like we could kick back and relax. I like that a lot. So thanks so much, buddy.
Yeah, so I am Scott from Fabian Liberty. Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. I will agree with Lactoid, and also, of course, add the American Medical Association. That is a cartel supported by the government that destroyed our healthcare system instead of the Lodge healthcare system. I also love that PrimeCayes believes that he has me figured out. And that's, he's close. And that's probably because I'm the only logically consistent person here. So it's easy to figure out what my arguments will be because I'm always logically consistent, unlike all these subjectivist lefties that just shift with the wind. If you want to find more libertarian content, check me out, Fabian Liberty everywhere.
Actually, I think that's actually a fair point. Like, you are actually, I think it's actually fair. That he's really the most consistent person. He doesn't change, right? Like, it constantly implies everything through that one lens, and yeah,
almost religious like.
Almost religious like.
Religious type beat.
But all right, that's actually fair. All right, well, thank you, Scott. And let's move on to Ty. Ty, thanks for stopping by, for being a part of all this. Tell a little about yourself.
Yeah, this one was interesting. I'm sorry I didn't speak as much as I usually like to. However, this conversation did not go anywhere where I thought it was going to go. I thought the first topic we'd be like talking about like should these NCAA players like actually enjoy their ability to have these contracts or not? And apparently we got into like minor subcontract law. I was not equipped for that conversation. I'm sorry, y'all fucked it up for me. I blame Lactoid. Let's just be honest. And then the second topic was like religious doctrine, which I thought we'd kind of like get into the weeds a little bit of like, hey, maybe this needs to change in religion, but not, oh, well, scripture from 300 AD actually was what matters here. So my final notes are this: Marxism is religion, so is wokeism. I'm interested to see if these new religions actually moderate out and become mainstream or not, or if they just fucking crash and burn. But it is largely replacing the religious void that the left does not have in their lives, and if that actually fulfills your soulful needs, then good luck. It's not looking too good for y'all right now, but whatever. And then if you're interested in anything I have to say, Tiberius D on Twitch, and YouTube. Appreciate for having me.
TikTok.
Yeah.
What do you support the Chinese?
Yes, I sold out to the Chinese.
Chinese malware. Don't download it.
Oh, damn.
Sold out to the Chinese.
The masses are fat on TikTok though, so I get it.
True.
I get
Thank
it.
you so
The
much.
masses fat.
Okay.
What the fuck?
I'll thanks also for
I
stopping by.
just-
Oh god. Thank y'all for stopping by and being a part of all this. I'll what about yourself?
He's in public school and he's Catholic, so I mean, you had to put a little pedophilia in there.
Oh my
Thank
god.
you. So, I really enjoyed myself. Thank you, as always. Thank you for inviting me today, Prime. The PCNF community is alive and well. For my closing statements, I think that, talking about the femininity and the masculinity in the face of the divine is a perfectly appropriate subject matter to talk about on a college campus. I mean, where else would you have it? I think, it would have been better as a lecture than a sermon. Maybe that's probably why people were crying, because they weren't probably primed to engage intellectually with the material instead of like religiously. With the
NCAA.
NCAA. Yep, there we go. I'm about to call it the NAACP real quick, but that's totally wrong.
Some say it's the same.
It might be. There's a lot of black
Yes,
people
that's
involved,
what's
indeed.
wrong. That's crazy. So, yeah, I think that the athletes should enjoy the opportunity to have the fruits of their labors for the first time, but they need to be careful because we don't want them to be exploited and swindled out of their hard-earned money. They should probably, if possible, get some lawyers or someone who knows what they're doing. Maybe some upperclassmen who know how to work contracts to see what deals they're going to be getting, and hopefully they can navigate themselves into having a really great career playing. So I think those are some takeaways that I had from today.
Much. Hey, Aiko, thank you for adding all that like context for especially the religion talk, right? Like you really did enrich this discussion. I appreciate you for being.
Yeah, there was one thing I did want to get into, but I didn't want to derail the conversation. But after I heard Lactoid talk about Black Jesus, it was kind of funny that, and you brought it up a little bit, Prime, because he talked about Black Jesus, and then you kind of retorted with, okay, white Jesus, right? Because neither one of those would be historically accurate. But it's interesting to see which of those two gets complained about by which people, because it seems to me that like making Jesus like in one's own image is a 2,000-year-old like thing. Like it's just, we do make Jesus like part of us. And my thinking on that sermon was that he was trying to make Jesus relevant to a group of people that maybe wasn't perceived as relevant to. And so maybe he did it inartfully, but like I said, he was pulling from an ancient tradition, ancient and medieval tradition there with some of his things that he was claiming. And I think that in many ways, I think we're just not used to seeing it in this way, but in many ways, we like to see Jesus as ourselves.
Much. And we can have the further conversation if you want to jump in the open panel. I'd love to hear more about that and then yell at you that everything you're
Blacktoad wants to say for white Jesus, I think it'd be great.
Okay.
Well, I mean, he came back already. Like it's Kyle Rittenhouse. We know he's white.
Okay. Let's. Well, actually, the person who brought up who thought being Jesus being black was ridiculous. That was Kyle. Kyle is the one who said that.
Oh, it was Al that said that. Oh, I'm sorry.
I also said it.
Okay, yeah. Black
so,
Jesus gets a lot of poor guy.
Yeah, I think
not as much as Black Santa.
Hold on, has anyone seen American Gods? Because in American Gods, there are, they have all these different gods are real on Earth is the concept. And they went through several seasons, like you meeting all these different gods from different pantheons. They finally made it to Jesus. And there's like 30 Jesuses at this wedding that they're at. So because there's one Jesus for every like iteration of Jesus, like in people's belief, according to that.
Hold on. There is a legitimate place near the Wailing Wall that is a mental institution that specializes in dealing with people with Messiah complex. And never in my entire life have I wanted a reality TV show more than following the psych ward of like 50
So
people
unethical.
that believe. I know it's unethical, but I'm just being honest. Of like 50 different people.
Is
being
that any worse than my
I'm-
600-pound life? I mean, really?
I am the return of God. It's like, no, I'm the return of God. Like arguing at the cafeteria. I want this so bad. I know that you cannot make this show, but please, someone
Scott.
just do this.
No,
Scott,
I am the real Napoleon.
I would be willing to like pitch this to a network with you. Okay, all right.
It's got to be like, it's got to be something in like Germany or somebody
Yeah,
really
right.
willing to take risks.
Let's go. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. And yeah, let's have that conversation. If anyone wants to stick around for an open panel, let's have that conversation. Let's go to our friend Corey. Corey, thank you for coming through and being a part of this. But I love when Corey gets like annoyed and puts up like a good fight. So thank you so much, man.
I try every once in a while. And yeah, so to Lactoid's point about the American Bar Association, and I'm all about talking about potentially institutions that, maybe we should either reform or abolish. I'm a little bit on the fence on the American Medical Association, but open to the conversation. But what should be abolished as institutions is the American Chiropractic Association and the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. Those should not exist. Those are also, physicians and doctors in air quotes. But yeah, and also wrapping up the first topic again. I'm gonna probably just reiterate this until it happens. It's not gonna solve every problem with college athletes, but ban football. That's the solution. And so yeah. It's been a pleasure. Always great to be here. Always the best topics. I'm Corey Campbell. You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv, CoreyCampbell84. I'm a biochemist. I cover science, news, to workout streams. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Literally, it's Corey Campbell. And yeah, Joe, Ico, Isle of Isles, Tiberius, Scott, and Lactoid. Always a pleasure. Familiar faces and beautiful faces.
Yeah, faces.
you.
Hey, Corey, have you ever debated homozygote? I'm just curious. I've been curious. About
Well,
that for a
I don't
while.
think what would we debate about, since I think we almost like perfectly overlap.
There's got to be science controversies.
Let's go.
I'd be open to it.
Let's go and finally, because I've held you guys up here long enough. Our friend Joe Lewis. Thank you, Joe Lewis. Right, like, Joe Lewis, like you always add like so many extra dimensions to these conversations, right? Like as soon as you came in, right? Like you just came in last second before the second topic, and like you dropped some like really interesting perspectives, right? And I always appreciate that. Like it's for you at your finest. So thank you, Joe, for doing that.
I try to be a shitter from time to time. Yeah, no, I wish I was there for the first topic because there's a player in Texas. His name's Octavian, and like they're kind of just giving him the runaround on his Whataburger deal. And I was hoping like I'd be able to go on the first topic and talk about that because basically what's happening is he has like his giant Whataburger deal, and he's basically untouchable because he runs a 4-2. And just I don't know. I was hoping
Well, we could talk about an
that.
open panel if you want to stick around there.
Maybe. I will do. Here's what I want to talk about. All right. So like, and maybe it's gonna be an open, maybe it's gonna be another topic because there's a wonderful, really cool Florida woman who's suing Kraft right now because the Velveeta shells and cheese is misleading in her eyes because it takes longer than 3.5 minutes. And apparently, according to her, the package is wrong. It's misleading. She's suing for $5 million. And I'm just saying, why the fuck didn't eat Velveeta shells my whole life? Because I want that come up. God damn it.
On YouTube, there's
Lawyers are terrible.
There's a short documentary of a person who only eats like Velveeta shells and cheese.
Exactly. Like,
well, they're not so happy, and they're not living their best life. Let's put it that way.
I'm sure he's doing great. They I don't know, man. Like it's like I hope like if she wins, like how big is this come up gonna be? It's like
Lactoid, would you take that case? Like if someone was gonna pay you.
Yo, I mean, yeah, of course.
her argument apparently
Someone's gonna pay me. I'm just saying,
her
like
argument
ridiculous.
apparently is that like it's too premium. Like I read it over.
It's crazy.
When I was at the
How do you
banquet.
prove damages?
Like I don't know. I'm just saying that like she's got a point.
Oh,
If it doesn't take
All
3 minutes and 3.5 minutes, she's got a point.
if it takes over 3.5 minutes, then like you can add up the
talking about
time
the prep
that
time.
you. Yeah, if you add up the
Sure.
time that you've extra time that you've spent on that, right? This is I could have been doing something else, right? Add in your wages, right? Multiply that, and then you got damages.
$5 million, I'm sure. Right? You can do the math.
Yeah. I'm just saying. I hope it changes so we get that piece of history for our kids. Why does it say ready in 7.5 minutes? Because some lady in Florida sued.
All right, thank you all so
Anyway.
much. This is a lot of fun. That's why I enjoy having this group of people, right? We have a lot of fun here. Thanks so much, everyone. We are going to go into open walk on panel right after this. Anyone here can join us, but if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion in my community. I know they appreciate your idea. Have a good one. Bye.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Later.